Hello, everyone. I am here today to talk about understanding suicide. Understanding suicide begins by talking about suicide. One point I want to make very clear is that studies show talking about suicide does not cause people to feel suicidal. First, how many of you know someone who has died by suicide? Oh, that's a lot of people. I know 8 people who have died. Some were friends, and some were friends of friends. And after every death, I kept asking myself the same question: why? I actually tried to die by suicide 9 years ago, and I find myself asking, why? Why did I try? Why didn't I die? Why is my situation different from these people that I knew? My own experience with suicidality is this weird feeling of being dissociated and alone. It's like a delusion, but like the inverse of a delusion. Instead of imagining things being there when they actually aren't, I am imagining that things are not there when they actually are. I can't see the connections between myself and my friends. I can't see the love and compassion in their faces. It's all distorted, and I think they don't like me. I feel annoying and alienated and alone. In the interpersonal theory of suicide, this is called thwarted belongingness. To clarify, we don't necessarily know what neurobiological changes happen when someone dies by suicide. But my own experience tells me that there must be something, because everything feels different. One of the only ways I have figured out how to snap out of this feeling is by trusting in lollipop moments. If you've never heard of a lollipop moment, it comes from one of my favorite TED Talks by Drew Dudley. He talks about how everyday leadership begins by starting that random conversation, giving out an unexpected compliment, handing out a lollipop to someone, not even realizing that the person receiving it needs it the most right then. It's the serendipity of bumping into the right person at the right time. The thing with serendipity and lollipop moments is that they require that you go out into the world. This obviously became very difficult during the pandemic. In fact, suicide rates for primary and high school students increased dramatically during quarantine. People couldn't just walk out their doors and have unexpected interactions. I was really lucky this past summer that I was able to find a community through mutual aid organizing and activism. I was able to meet people, and more importantly, I was able to help people. Volunteering and helping people has a twofold effect. It gives you a sense of belonging, and it makes you feel less like a burden. I've had fantastic conversations with my houseless neighbors. They've become my friends. There's something about the unexpected nature of human connection that snaps me out of this feeling of being alone and dissociated. And this is a really important point to focus on. There's a lot of research showing that one of the biggest factors contributing to suicide is a feeling of hopelessness or immutability, the feeling of being stuck in a bad situation with no possibility of getting out. It's like your brain thinks it's psychic, and it's telling you, I know that this bad situation will never end. And things like physical illness, unemployment, and family conflict exacerbate this. Given the vicious cycle of poverty, for some people, like my homeless friends, these things are more immutable than for others. This is called perceived burdensomeness. When I tried to die by suicide 9 years ago, I was in a really bad situation. I had just dropped out of high school, I was unemployed, and things were really, really rough with my family. I could not see a future for myself. And I felt like I was making things worse for everyone around me. I remember being in the ambulance, and one of the paramedics asked me why I did this. I literally rolled my eyes and said, because I'm just ungrateful and don't realize how good my life is. And he said, yeah, that's true. And the reason why I said that is because I had met so many people who had reacted just like him to the suicide attempts and suicide ideations of others in the past. But people who die or try to die by suicide aren't trying to be ungrateful. Oftentimes they realize that things could be worse and that they should be happy. But they're not. Realizing that places a huge psychological burden on someone. As a logical human being, this awful cognitive dissonance occurs. Things aren't that bad, so why do I still want to die? What's wrong with me? And sometimes, things are that bad. Suicide and poverty go hand in hand. In the United States, the counties with the highest rates of suicide have a poverty level of at least 20%. Leon County has a poverty level of 20.7%. In the 32304 zip code, 48% of kids live in poverty. If you're poor, you're probably going to feel like a burden. The first person I ever knew to die by suicide was a girl named Stephanie. I met her at a mental hospital in high school. She was there for a non-fatal suicide attempt. That's another myth I want to dispel right now. People say, if you had really wanted to die, you would have just killed yourself. But it's not that easy. In fact, dying by suicide is very hard. Every instinct in our brain has evolved to help us not die. There's a lot of big mental hurdles that must be broken down before you can actually die by suicide, or try dying, or even think about dying. In fact, previous suicide attempts are the strongest predictor for deaths by suicide. One study estimates a 20 to 40 times higher risk of death by suicide for those who have previously attempted. So I met my friend Stephanie after she had tried to die by suicide. Looking at her, you would never have thought she would try this. She was a popular cheerleader. But her dad had died a year before, and she had fallen into a depression. Her grades were slipping, she couldn't get out of bed, and her mom was blaming her for not trying harder. Stephanie felt like a burden, like she should just get over this, but she didn't know how. And then, a few years later, she did die by suicide. And that's how I learned that just because somebody doesn't die the first time, doesn't mean that they won't die the next time. I was not a star cheerleader, but I was placed in the gifted program as a kid. And for myself, there was a stark contrast between where I was and where I felt like I was supposed to be. I was supposed to be a star student. I was supposed to be a genius. But life didn't go according to plan, because it never does. Basically, a lot of unexpected bad things happened. And at the same time, there was no way to predict the unexpected good things that happened and turn things around. And there is still no way to predict them. I've learned to rely on a fundamental belief that when things seem hopeless, and I logically can't see any way out, I just have to irrationally believe that something good will happen, even though I have no evidence or proof. In fact, sometimes the only proof that I have is that a bunch of bad things happen that I couldn't predict. Therefore, maybe a bunch of good things might happen that I also can't predict. I've learned to place my faith in randomness and chance, and seek solace in the fact that I don't know and can't know what's going to happen next. The most important lollipop moment of my life came at a coffee shop. I had a habit of going to coffee shops when I felt suicidal, like a ghost. I would sit and try to quietly read and pretend that I did not exist. During one of these days, one of the baristas noticed that I felt like this. He brought me a milkshake and told me it was on the house. That milkshake provided the spark that I needed. I slowly came back to the world, marveling at the random kindness of others and their ability to see the quietly suffering. This same barista died by suicide a few years later. Nobody was expecting it. This was the kind of person you could describe as cool, calm, and collected, always cracking jokes. But he was unemployed, struggling with mental health issues, and had just received a $200 parking ticket. It was a lot of stressors piled on all at the same time. The owner of this coffee shop implemented a new rule for the employees. Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a battle that you know nothing about. Of course, this is easier said than done. The thing with lollipop moments is that it's not enough to go out into the world and bump into kind strangers and receive that unexpected milkshake. We also need to create a world that nurtures the creation of lollipop moments. And that's where I believe everyone in this audience can make a difference. It's not about one person doing a bunch of things. It's about a bunch of people doing little things. Suicide is a community problem. It needs a community response. I'm going to share a few of the little things that have helped me. First, probably the most important thing is that I have a really strong support network. It's important that I don't have just one friend to turn to, because that is way too much pressure for any one person to handle. But I've had the same core group of friends for over 10 years. They've seen me through all of my ups and downs, and they still love me unconditionally. I also have a lot of really nice acquaintances. There was one time that I failed an exam, and I was crying in the bathroom. One of my classmates saw me and sent me a text message later saying, "Hey, I hope everything's okay." It didn't lead into a long conversation, but I appreciated her taking the time out of her day to say, "Hey, I saw that you were hurting, and I care." Exercise is also extremely important, but to be honest, this became very difficult during the pandemic. I had a really hard time motivating myself. This is where community becomes important. My roommate invites me to do yoga with her in the morning. I had a friend who is teaching me jujitsu. I view this as preparation for battle, for the next time my brain starts to feel alienated and alone. I journal, I go to therapy, I eat healthy, I follow a schedule. And it's important that I do all of those things when I'm feeling fine. I've had to make these habits second nature, something I do without thinking or planning. Because when you're depressed, it's hard to think about doing anything. And ultimately, after years of fighting suicidal thoughts, I started taking medication. But medication isn't a magic cure. I still have to do all of these other things in addition to taking medication. And it took a long time for me to get to this point. I've started and failed so many times. I still slip up. It's easy to lose patience and get frustrated. I just try to remind myself and others to just keep trying after every struggle. One of my favorite quotes is, "Why do we fall? So we learn to pick ourselves up." My life is full of things I never thought I could do. I never thought I would make it to FSU. I never thought I would major in mathematics. And I never thought I would be able to do this TED Talk. I just had to keep telling myself that I won't know what I can do until I try again, even after I have failed so many times before. And listing these things out loud is important. I went through a really bad breakup last year. I was devastated. A friend told me, "Say out loud, 'I'm strong, I'm capable, I will get through this.'" And then she made me say it. And then she made me say it again. And I really think that using my voice helped bring that idea into a reality. There's something about the physical nature of doing things that's important for the neuroplasticity in your brain. One of the things I've learned is to imagine gold dust settling on my skin whenever I have a moment of feeling calm, accomplished, and powerful. to engage all of my senses. Because this is what happens to your body naturally when a traumatic event happens. Your sympathetic nervous system turns on and records all of these sights, smells, and sounds to protect you from future bad things. But you have to actively make that switch yourself when something good is happening. So I try to engage all of my senses and get into my physical body and out of my head. I have to say, I can do it louder than the inner voice that's worried and telling me that I can't. And all of these are little things that I do. And I have to do them every day. It's about lifestyle changes for all of us. Some extra kindness in our day, more mindfulness when we get to work, paying more attention to a coworker after a meeting or a classmate after an exam, making all of the tools and resources that I mentioned available in every household, especially low-income homes. For myself, I believe that I have not died by suicide because along the way, I have repeatedly been given hope. And because I have been given hope, I believe it is our responsibility to give each other hope. To do that requires realizing that suicide prevention is a community effort. And this requires a radical understanding of love for ourselves and our fellow human beings. I hope that today's talk provided something towards that understanding. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.